Hello everyone, and this is Supreme Decisions, and welcome to the Supreme Decisions Legal Minute Podcast. Today is a technical special episode. It's also an episode that kind of kicks off our new Supreme Decisions as we know it from now on. So starting 2022, we're going to start off right with the new podcast, but we're also going to talk about the use of force, because a lot of times people think I'm anti-police because I say a lot of things and I talk about suing police officers. I talk about pretty much correcting the behaviors of public policy versus that of real law when it comes to a police encounter. I've also spoken about the reconstruction, not the defunding of police. I've even spoke on I hate to call it this, but it's the George Floyd police reform bill. Now, I'm going to speak of that in today's episode. I'm also going to give you context within that, because I know a lot of people are like, we need reform. The problem is that bill doesn't address the reform that's needed. I'm going to say that again. I understand people are going to have a little mishap by what was said, by me hating to call it that, because at the end of the day, the bill does not address the actual need. That's the problem I have with it. And for it to be called reform, it's kind of redundant because it has very little to do with reformation and even less with allocation. So I'm going to go into it because, weekly you'll hear me go on about cases that have gone on, maybe past, present, even looking into future matters. And this one is going to be a little blend of all three. I'm going to address a couple of things while going through this, which is for me the easy, simply because you literally have a movie that depicts this, and that's the murder of Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. Even in the movie, you see poor police actions. You see it being committed by police officers that have been reprimanded for doing the wrong thing, not once, not twice, but in this case, 4 times, and then attempting to get away with it by further lying, not knowing that they're being recorded because they are not the ones in the control of the recording, which is also why I spoke about I believe 2 years ago, the build of the cloud, the purpose of the cloud, and the stopping of videos on Facebook and Instagram, and at the time Periscope and a few others. And that was because police officers were deleting videos on people's cell phone or flat out destroying people's cell phones. And now, come to find out, because of this little bill that was written back in 2000, 2001, deleting that information was in fact illegal because it's destruction of evidence. But yet we're still told we should respect police officers. We're told we should respect the things that are going on, yet no one ever wants to digress and say maybe they're being punished for doing what they're trained to do. Remember the conversation I had with a friend of mine who's a police officer, who's been a police officer for a very long time. And when I spoke about even the reform bill, I spoke about the lack of conversation or even request or even mandating of training or even retraining. Because I even spoke about the business part of it through restructuring. Because most people understand a hostile takeover. What happens you get rid of everybody. And then you go through a rehiring process. That was my recommendation. Because unfortunately, police are needed. Because without police, you have chaos. I do understand that. But my knock, and just like everyone else's issue, is not with people wearing the uniform. It's those that are wearing the uniform that are protecting bad cops. Because even a good cop's worst nightmare is a bad cop. Because I actually watched this morning 846 Dave Chappelle, where he did a show in June of 2020 during the pandemic in his neighbor's barn. And he brought up something. And he brought up Christopher Darden, who was a former military man. And he was also a former Los Angeles Police Department police officer. Now, why is that important? Why did Dave Chappelle bring that up? He brought up the fact that Christopher Darden actually had witnessed something that he deemed wrong by one of his fellow comrades in blue. You know, because he's, again, part of the Blue Wall. He served his country. He understands that he was defending something. Well, unfortunately, when you take the uniform off, you never take it off. When you're literally risking your life for something you believe is right, it doesn't change just because you get a job. Well, the conversation turned into him being fired. Why? Because when you're in the blue, you are not your brother's keeper. You cannot publicly reprimand, or in a lot of cases, privately reprimand a fellow brother or sister in blue. And even the conversation I had with a friend of mine who's a police officer, his whole context was, yes, I'm a police officer. Yes, we do this. Yes, we are a brotherhood. And I asked him, can I say I love my brother if I'm not allowed to reprimand his poor behavior? Christopher Darden actually was not allowed to reprimand his fellow officer. He was later fired. He believed in our justice system. Because, again, I love smart people. Because they live in the world of should. They understand 1 + 1 should be 2. The problem is, we're working with that new math. 1 + 1 is however you feel. It's your feelings. We're in a feeling society. The greatest aspect of any of this is the smart person believing this is not a science. They're believing that this adversarial system is fair and just. Their honestly belief that police officers are exalted human beings. Because you remember the Bible verse I gave you, the greatest among you shall be a servant to all. A police officer places themselves into a position of servitude, yet none of them want to be in service. I'm going to say that one more time. The greatest among you shall be a servant to all. Police officers place themselves. They make a conscious decision. They do conscious acts that place themselves in positions of servitude, yet not wanting or willing to serve, or in this case, not being trained to serve the public. Now, in the midst of that, Christopher Darden went out and waged war against the Los Angeles Police Department and those that he deemed were the wrongdoers. But he had a little bit of collateral damage because he also included their families. Now, the celebration of this culminated with Christopher Darden's death and a congregating of more than 400 police officers at the scene of his death. This was actually their means of protesting against the actions of Christopher. That's pretty much it. It was their act or show of protest against his actions. Yet, they're being punished for doing what they're trained to do. Now, you often hear me talk about police officers' standard issue: 7 non-lethal weapons, 1 lethal weapon. We just watched Kimberly Porter she was convicted on first degree and second degree manslaughter of a young man that she pulled over at a traffic stop. The great part about this is the irony of this situation. The reason why I use irony is the simple fact that this woman killed a young man. We knew more about this young man than we did about Kim. We actually learned who Kim was an entire year later. Simply because during the trial, Kim spoke. There were questions that was asked during the trial that were asked early on that was only answered a year later. Now, I'm going to go through something, because I'm going to get back to the irony of that situation. Because I'm often told that police officers are not responsible for your care. Yet their fiduciary duty means do no harm, which is why they're given 7 non-lethal weapons. I'm also going to read something from a California Police Department policy, and then I'm going to go through something that deals with military rules of engagement. Why am I going to do that? Because 2008, there was this president that sought to demilitarize our police department. Why would he have to demilitarize something if it's for the protection of the people? Who are they militarizing against? I've been heard to say it is a war against the poor. Even in the police reform bill, they actually speak of the use of grenade launchers. Who in the hell is that for? Because again, my brother used to use the context of me offering people help, just legal help and assistance, as giving a handgun to a child. You never know how it is, but you know at some point you're going to make the news. And guess what? I made the news all over this country. But now I'm going to give someone, when we're speaking in the context of Jordan v. Prince and the hiring of police officers that are militarized, that the reform bill, who's not asking for retraining, states you're now going to give these people that have a 104 IQ or less a grenade launcher. I'm going to ask again, who is that for? Now, before I get those smart ass comments and all that good stuff, I do realize that the reform bill as written is dead. Did not make it through. I actually applaud that. It needs to be rewritten. It needs to include mandatory training. It also needs to include mandatory educational requirements, because I don't want to continue handing handguns to children, because I cannot continue saying it's okay to have more training on your pistol than you do on a taser. I also want to employ, if I'm going to tase you, to get certified for a taser, because again, the brain remembers pain and pleasure. So it's more difficult to grab that taser than it is that pistol, because you're not being shot with that pistol. Which is why Miss Porter, who said, I thought I was grabbing my taser, the reason why she made that mistake, the reason why it was negligence, is because she's trained more hours with that pistol. She's trained to grab that first. It's this thing we call in basketball muscle memory. It's the thing when Muhammad Ali had Parkinson, when he was able to go in to his living room in the mornings and hit the speed bag and bounce on his toes and be coherent. It's muscle memory. It's not accidental that she couldn't figure out where her taser was. It's not accidental that when they broke into Kenneth Chamberlain Sr.'s home, they lied about what went on. It wasn't accidental that video was not turned over. It wasn't accidental that these officers, who were noted bad officers, did something bad. These officers who's noted to make poor decisions made a poor decision. Because the one thing I like, and I'm getting ready to get on with it, the one thing I like is, one of my favorite movies is Belly. Most people think I just like it because of all the violence, the sex, and drugs. No. It's a mere 10 actually it's like a 5-minute section. DMX goes in to kill the preacher. Why? Because he's easier to blend in. He's easier to get close to someone that looks like him. So they're going to use someone that looks like you to be able to blend in to get close to kill you. That's why whenever they go into the numbers, they forget to tell you about this thing called proximity. We forget about those numbers when we're talking about comfort. People rarely go outside of their comfort zone. They go where they're comfortable. They do the things they're comfortable doing because they're doing what's easy. Because no one wants to step outside of anywhere that allows them to stretch on purpose. That's not where the majority lies. But he goes into the thing, spare the rod, spoil the child. We look at so often police officers, again, they can't reprimand one another. They're not being held accountable by the prosecutors, who are, again, a secondary station for the people. And then even in this speech, he said there are crimes with no real punishment. So even when they do something wrong, they get to go home for 2 weeks with pay. They don't even miss a paycheck. Why? Because 80% of this country lives paycheck to paycheck. They tell you, oh, police officers don't make that much money, yet most of them make 6 figures. They're living in the top 20% of Americans. But see, when I said that, people said, you're crazy. But then we go into these auditors' pages. We go into these areas where we're pulling up public records. We're going up into these areas and we're seeing this bad officer was making $116,000 a year. This bad sergeant was making $180,000 a year. We've actually pulled up a supervisor We're not going to say his name, but he was a guy that got fired because he lied. He's out of Chicago. In the next couple of weeks, you'll probably hear me start picking on my new target, which is Aurora, Colorado. Their police department. Because it's amazing to me how all these people are talking about they're cleaning up these police departments, yet they haven't retrained a soul. They're having additional training requirements, yet they're rehiring officers such as in Fulton County that have had multiple reprimands. They're not checking backgrounds. Why? Because again, it's easier to control someone that's not intelligent than it is to train someone to do the right thing. But again, we're forgetting that the system is working like it's supposed to. Now, when we're talking about the use of force, a friend of mine, he's actually from Germany. And we talk often because, again, he's one of those intelligent people. He's smart. He lives in the world of should. Yeah, he does. I love the guy. Love him. And when I say things to him, he looks at me kind of cross-eyed. It's hard for him to digest. It's even harder for him to understand some of the things I've gone through simply for being where I'm at. Being in what they called in Atlanta, Stewart Avenue, Metropolitan Boulevard. It's called a high drug area, high crime area. Guess what? It's also a low income area. It's also a congested housing area. Yet it's also where a lot of your nightlife is. And here's something else. I have a lot of friends that stay down there. Because even one morning when my truck was towed, the cop said, he said, you know what, I hate to leave you out here. You dress so well. I just hate to do this. And I started laughing. I said, look, I'm good. I actually lived over here in Mechanicville. I'm good. He didn't understand that because I didn't look like I was from that area. I didn't look like I would be someone that would be in the area. I didn't look like somebody that was supposed to be around that area, which was the whole purpose of the stop, because again, it was something that he attempted to project. The problem was this thing called clearly established. He learned about that later. Because at the end of the day, you have to understand, I understand what the fight is. I learned a long time ago, you don't argue with fools at a distance because you can't tell who's who. I don't dumb down for my audience. My audience has to come up. So when we're speaking about anything, especially things of law, things regarding police officers, things regarding personal protection, and my favorite, anything that deals with a human right. I don't just do criminal cases. I don't just do civil cases. I don't just do, I'm for the people. I'm doing this for the blacks. I want to raise the blacks. I want to do this. No. I'm doing this for humans. Because again, this is another Jay-Z. I downgraded to a human being. I understand what the red and blue pills are for. I'm looking at, can you see what it is I see? Can you hear what it is I hear? Can you feel what it is I feel? These are the questions that I'm asking you. But I want to make sure that I'm clear. This is a meal. I could force feed you everything I know. The problem is you couldn't digest it. Just like if I gave you too much candy, your body can't take it. Even if you go into the Matrix, when Johnson was overloaded with information, what happened? He exploded. That's what this is. The only difference is I'm giving it to you in small doses. I'm making sure you can consume it, digest it, and may I have another? That's what this is. So when I talk about this, I want you to understand what it is I'm coming from. I'm making sure that the picture I paint, when it's concluded, not just you, not just your children, but your grandchildren and great-grandchildren will understand the picture that I painted today, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years from now. Because this is going to live way beyond me. Because this goes beyond me. And much of this that I'm bringing you is prior to me. So it's not mine anyway. I'm going to say that one. It's not mine anyway. I'm just giving it to you in a means that most people have yet to figure out how to understand. Now, when I talk about the use of force, the one thing I actually liked was I'm going through these police manuals, and most of them speak about the common things. A firearm is one of the tools available to law enforcement. It is not a toy. It is not a first option. And then it gives you that thing, except. And then it has situations. That's amazing. It's not a first option for law enforcement officers, yet it is always the first thing. When you pull someone over for a broken tail light, why is your gun drawn? If you're pulling someone over because they're speeding down the expressway, they're going 10 miles over on the expressway, why is your first option your gun? Unless it's what you're trained to do. Unless that's the muscle memory. Because I can walk out on the court. You know, I'm going to actually give you a better example. Because I love me some me, but I also love this one thing. McDonald's had a commercial. Many of you will not remember. Some of you will know exactly the commercial I'm talking about. McDonald's had a commercial with Magic Johnson and this young man named Larry Bird. Now, Larry Bird is Larry Legend. He's Larry Legend because he was known for knocking down the three. Larry had been retired at this point, I want to say 6 years. Larry is in dress clothes, pulls off his dress jacket, goes to the corner, and they say, all right, Larry, all we want you to do, miss some threes. Larry said, well, that'll be easy because I haven't touched the ball since the Olympics. That was 92. He was on the dream team. Well, Larry goes out. He makes shot after shot after shot after shot. In fact, he made 13 in a row, all on video. Now, that seems like trash now considering Steph Curry made 106, but we're talking semantics at this point. The thing is, Larry Bird hadn't touched the ball for 6 years because he had a bad back. He wasn't in basketball gear. He was in his everyday clothes. Yet, just like Muhammad Ali, he caught the ball in the corner, squared up, knocked it down 13 times. Larry Bird changed the ideals of that commercial. Many of us have to understand why Kim Porter grabbed her gun first. Because just like I said, she had more hours training with that pistol than she did her taser. Because on average, I'm going to give you the 7 that are pretty much all police officers countrywide. There may be one variation, maybe 2. However, I'm going to give you the most common 7. Number 1 is hand-to-hand combat. Hand-to-hand combat generally deals with this thing called jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is a martial art, which not quite what we're looking at on MMA or when we're watching UFC or Bellator or Strikeforce, can't forget them. But jiu-jitsu is an art form which allows low effort and restraining. Why? Because we're liable for the protection of the people. Because people are innocent until we prove them to be guilty, unless the police officer witnesses a felony. Because we often talked about how it was justified for the times the bomber got killed or shot by police, because he had killed those people with that bomb, yet we didn't see anything. We were told that. Now, we knew Christopher Darden had killed those people, and we were justified in his killing. We were okay with how he was killed because we were told what he had done. See where I'm going with this? Police officers didn't witness anything. We knew what he said he was going to do, but we were okay with his demise because we concluded that he had done those acts. He was already guilty. So we allowed the police to play not only devil's advocate, we allowed them to play the role of executioner, and we were good with that. Back to that whole saying, crimes with no real punishment. But what about Philando Castile? Philando Castile was pulled over because of a taillight. He told the police officer, yes, I have a registered firearm and my card is in my pocket. Police officer told him, don't reach for it. Put your hands on the steering wheel. He puts his hands on the steering wheel. The police officer shoots him multiple times. His partner, the police officer's partner, which every time I've watched it, after the original showing, asked him, why did you shoot? Because Philando wasn't moving. Philando wasn't reaching. And there was a child, an infant child, sitting directly behind Philando. When the police officer, who has a duty of care, decided to use his first line of defense, his first and only lethal weapon in a situation where he had backup, and he was not punished for it. We look at situations where that's not a jiu-jitsu situation. But then we also look at a taser, which Kim Porter thought she was using on someone at a traffic stop. Which Kim Porter thought she was using on someone along with her backup. Why was she the one with her gun out? With all those people there, why was she the one taking the shot? Don't worry, I'll let that sink in, because there's also another young man. His car broke down in the middle of the highway. He was walking back to his car, hands in the air. He was called because he was causing a disturbance. We were justified at the police killing him, yet it was one officer out of 30 who decided to take a shot and take this man's life. She was not reprimanded. Crimes with no real punishment. That was not a lethal situation moment. Because most of us don't like to talk about this either. George Floyd. He was restrained with a carotid artery choke, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu hold. It is actually an illegal hold or an illegal choke in competition. He was hog-tied, not resisting. But people was upset at 8 minutes and 46 seconds. All 4 officers lied using stock language about what had happened, yet with backup. Yet they felt justified in putting their hands in their pocket and stopping others from intervening, knowing he had violated department policy. Because most of us know if you cut off oxygen to the brain for more than 2 minutes, you can pretty much have someone be rendered brain dead. But we were justified in knowing that George Floyd in the past had been a criminal, yet he had committed no crime at that time. I'm going to say that one more time. Yes, George Floyd was not a good person prior. Yes, George Floyd had committed criminal acts prior. It didn't change the fact that at that time, there was no crime. At that time, they couldn't even figure out why they were there. Yet, they decided it was okay to use force. Three officers attempted to separate themselves from their brother in blue when it was time for punishment. Yet, they're being punished for doing what they're trained to do. And they're committing crimes with no real punishment. Because, before I get deeper into that, I want you to go into the next one. Because again, talked about hand to hand. Talked about the taser. Let's talk about the easy one. Multiple officers. Because each one of these acts, whether I talk about Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Philando Castillo, they're partners. There are multiple police officers there. Why? Because we're supposed to, am I my brother's keeper? They always tell you, back the blue. Remember the blue. You're wearing blue like any other gang. Yet, when it's time for responsibility, when it's time to be your brother's keeper, oh, that's on you. That's on you. Yet birds of a feather. Okay, I'm not going to get into that either. But we also have this thing, because that was very prevalent during the Rodney King era, which is a baton, a retractable baton. We don't even see this very often. That used to be the thing because there was actual punishment for using that baton. It was actual punishment for using that taser or discharging that taser. Because hell, if you're in Atlanta and you discharge your gun at a child, it's okay, because 2 weeks later you can actually come and kill someone. And then when you get your job back a week after that, you can also shoot someone else. Crimes with no real punishment. we find out that something as simple as pepper spray they use that on the protesters. Oh no, I'm not talking about the rioters. I'm talking about the people that was protesting. You know, standing on the sidewalk, holding their signs, doing a little bit of shouting. You know, doing the thing that's allowed by your Constitution. That is a human right to address the people through grievance. You know, we the people. It's amazing how many people don't even know that. You had 57 officers quit because it wasn't okay for them not only to push a 70-year-old man to the ground and open his head and then step over him without rendering aid. They thought that was okay. They thought snatching 2 students out of a parked car for filming, not a traffic violation, but filming a police officer interaction, which is okay under the First Amendment and the Government and the Sunshine Act. Oh, excuse me, the Open Government Act of 2004. See, these things are okay, but they thought it was okay to pull these 2 students out. These 2 college students, these 2 students that are trying to better their life, these 2 students that probably have higher than a 104 IQ, and break one's arm. They thought that was okay. And then they caught the blue flu. Because they were being punished for doing what they're trained to do. These are the people we want to give grenade launchers to. They're upset about being demilitarized. My question is, who are they militarized for? And who in the hell is a grenade launcher for? Now, the reason why I brought up the rules of engagement is because, like I said, my guy from Germany, he spoke about the punishment for police officers. Because, again, police officers here have an issue with being punished for doing what they're trained to do. And yet, our police officer reform bill has no issue, no asking, no requirement of training, but they do have one for being vaccinated. But I'll get into that. I'll get into that later. Just not going to do that this time. Now, I'm going to read something because, again, this came from someone that's in the military. And these are contexts of rules of engagement. Because what I'm going to talk about, too, it's easy for me. It's easy for me because I understand these rules of engagement from a different perspective, excuse me. And the perspective is pretty much of a human being. I have the right to defend myself and my family. I have the right to defend my property and person. That's pretty much it, right? In Germany, they have this thing called equal opposition. Basically, if you come at me with a knife, I can't use a gun. However, I can use a baton, knock the knife out of your hand. Why? Because I'm trained in hand-to-hand combat. I am trained because I have on this bulletproof vest. But here, I have a taser. I have, in most cases, because sometimes you can't always get to them, but you have this thing called a beanbag gun. You know, the thing they shot the 70-year-old man, Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. with twice. The one with the heart condition. twice at close range. They have those. They even have this thing which they were supposed to use on a young lady that was having a mental episode on a highway, called rubber bullets. Instead, the one person that was told not to take a shot took one with a live round and killed her on the highway. Do no harm. Duty of care. You can actually go back to my video, 3 Laws Perfect. You can actually go into a few of my earlier podcasts when I talk about the duties, the fiduciary duties of a police officer. You can actually hear me when I read off the Georgia Constitution that speaks of being amenable at all times. Yet, we have these encounters in Gwinnett County. We have these encounters in Fulton County. We have these encounters more often than not in DeKalb County. You know, come on vacation, leave on probation, outcast. They said that for a reason. But it's understanding they're being trained to do these things. Because the system itself has nothing to do with law, which is why they can't turn over evidence, which is why they fight you so hard to find out the truth, which is why so many men and women are being released from death row on a crazy number. 67% of people that are released from death row is because of poor policing. The system itself failed it because of this poor policing, because if they were actually policing lawfully, which is why most of them have no idea what a lawful stop is. We wouldn't even have most of these people in jail, because even now I speak about our prison reform. Everybody, Donald Trump, he's great with prison reform, yet it only affected less than 23,000 people and only benefited 2,300 in a system that houses more than 2.1 million, which 840,000 plus are there because of bail, and they have yet to be convicted of anything. So what are we reforming? But now we talk about the rules of engagement, right? Because we know police officer's gun is not a toy, and it shouldn't be the first option. Yet, when the football player, the NFL football player, was in Vegas, there was a shooting in a casino where they were looking for a 5'7" white man. A Las Vegas police officer tackled 6'4", 300+ pound black male, put a gun to his head and told him, "I'll blow your effing brains out." And when asked why did he do that, he said, "We are looking for the shooter." So let me get this straight. 9 inches different in height. 9. Skin tone wasn't even close. So damn about the weight. Skin tone and height weren't even close. But his first option was to tackle this man, put a gun to his head, which is not supposed to be the first option, the gun, and tell him, and this is for Officer Dingle, "I will blow your effing brains out," because he was running. They're being punished for doing the things they're trained to do. Now, the first part of this, because the equal and opposite, I understand that. You always have the right to act in self-defense. Why? Because you have the right to protect your person. Now here's where the I guess the rubber meets the road. In all cases, not some, not in most, in all, you can only use the amount of force necessary to neutralize the attack or threat. In all cases, you are to use only the amount of force necessary to neutralize the attack or threat. We're being punished for doing what we're trained to do. I have 5 to 7 non-lethal options. My first mindset is to grab the one I am trained on the most through muscle memory. Crimes with no real punishment. So if I'm to neutralize the attack or threat, how does a police officer who have more free reign as a servant than someone who is actually deployed to combat literal attacks on their life? I have to ask the question again, who are they using a grenade launcher on? If I'm use only the amount of force necessary to neutralize. It doesn't say destroy. It doesn't say kill. It doesn't even say stop. It says neutralize. Now, when you have someone down and they're hogtied, they're neutralized. The act of putting 220 pounds on someone's carotid artery, that's excessive. When you have multiple officers on the scene, it's a good chance that person is neutralized, especially when they are unarmed. You may use deadly force to prevent your life and the lives of the members of your unit. Once the threat ends, the right to use deadly force stops. Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. was tased twice. He had a heart condition. Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., after being tased twice, was shot at close proximity with a shotgun beanbag. So basically a shotgun shooting a beanbag from close proximity, which means within 5 feet of a man has a heart condition, while on the floor with his hands to his side, not, with multiple officers near him, neutralized. He shot twice. He was unarmed. You are to use only the amount of force necessary to neutralize the threat. We're being trained. We're being trained. We are being trained because we are excusing these actions. We're allowing crimes with no real punishment. We're telling them it's okay every time we don't fight back. Every time we tell them it's an inconvenience for me to stand up for this right or that right. It's okay what you did this time. Spare the rod, spoil the child. You may use deadly force to prevent the theft of property such as weapons, which will pose an immediate threat to your life and the lives of your unit. think you remember the human rights statement I made. I have the right to protect my person, my family, and my property. In Texas, property has this thing called a conveyance, vehicle, automobile, whatever. That actually falls under property. Did you know pets fall under property? I have the right to defend my pet. But once that threat is neutralized, it is no longer imminent. You don't have someone who's 15 minutes on a job because his prior job, he's left because he shot someone in the back. He then goes to Philadelphia, and 15 minutes after being sworn in, he shoots someone in the back. And we're okay with that. Crimes with no real punishment. In all cases, you are to use only the amount of force necessary to neutralize the attack or threat. We can actually even go into equal opposition. We can also talk about the fact that I have pepper spray, I have a baton, I have a taser, I have hand-to-hand, I have partners. A lot of people use that ragged ass flashlight because it says on the flashlight, do not shine in eyes. What's the first thing police officers do? Shine it in your eye. Why? Because it neutralizes you. It stuns you. It blinds you. Yet, we're okay with that. There's literally a rule that says do not shine in the eyes of humans. Yet that's the first thing they do because they're trained to do that. We're trained to allow it. Use only the amount of force necessary to neutralize. Why do I keep saying that? Because at this point, someone has to answer to me and tell, you know what, I don't, you know, actually I do need that answer. Because why is a cop, police officer, because again, it's the Tommy Sotomayor question. Go listen to that podcast. It was a question he had. When did a servant become more important than its master? Do no harm. Duty of care. If they have a duty of care, who is it to? If the prosecutor's acting in the interest of the public, who's the public? Man only has the rights he can defend. No, and I scratch that. Man only has the rights he will defend. Because if you concede once, you concede to all. Understanding. You may use deadly force to prevent U.S. property, which is, when it is lost, will adversely affect national security. Whoops. Whoops. Because again, it went right back to property. And it even also dipped over into national security. Because we've also accepted certain things under the guise of national security. You may detain persons who pose an immediate threat to use deadly force against you. Wouldn't that be witnessing a felony? I'm going to ask it. Wouldn't that be witnessing a felony? If there is no witnessing of such felony, can you detain someone? Are you able to detain someone without probable cause? The probable cause will actually become from the witnessing of an active felony. You may disarm a detained person. I'm going to say that one more time. You can disarm a detained person, because you can do that without violating them. Now, they try to use this in this context of the pat down. Yet, in this case, there is a felony. There is a known felony. The disarming of someone as a military personnel is a felony. If it's done by a police officer, it's the witnessing of that felony and knowing. Because remember I said, even in Terryville, Ohio State, you got to know that. If not, it's a violation. I don't know gets it. I don't know gets you that violation if you continue anyway. Why? Because you're either continuing because you are ignorant to what the law is, or you're continuing because you don't care what the law is and you're doing what you're trained to do. And 95% of us are trained to believe that that's okay. Yet the law speaks otherwise. But then we go to what it is that is equal and opposite. If I have a cell phone in my hand, because even I'm actually going to put in 2022, you're going to see the video where a police officer states, because I guess they didn't realize, you know what, I'm going to say this too. The lack of self-awareness that most people walk around with is mind-boggling. Simply because they're holding a cell phone. They even attempt to hold the cell phone as a gun. They're attempting to hold it as if it has a handle on it. And the police officer say, yeah, you cannot mistake that for a gun. I can name 10 people right now that lost their lives because a police officer mistook a cell phone for a deadly weapon. Because I know if you videotape an interaction of police officers behaving poorly, they treat it as if you have the worst weapon in the world. Because here's where I'm going to conclude today. If it is to be, it begins with me. Many of us want change. Many of us want to fight back. Very few of us, less than 5%, actually have the will, desire to even attempt it. When I say we're being trained to believe is right, is we're being set up with crimes with no real punishment. Because if you actually go back and look at this movie, Belly, this movie is almost, if not 20 years old. It's not a new movie. And it's almost like they were looking into the future, because whenever this was written, they understood where this world and country was going. Because right now we're living where crime is running into, hell, I even look at it as purge territory. Because it's almost coming to the point where no one's off limits. Chicago had a week where they lost 6 officers through gun violence. Florida had 3 officers in a couple of days that lost their life to gun violence. Georgia had 10 officers, and I believe over a 3-week span in multiple counties. You have to understand, bad cops are good cops' worst nightmares. But the simple fact that I cannot reprimand someone doing something wrong, if I say I love them, I cannot allow that to continue for them. Because not only is it detrimental to them, it's detrimental to those around them, and also it's detrimental to those that look like them. And I'm a quote Dustin Poirier for a second, because everybody thinks karma is bad. Everybody, well, karma's gonna catch up to you. The problem is that works both ways. Because Dustin Poirier referred to his karma as a mirror. It's not good or bad. It's whatever you put into it. It's the seeds that you're planting. Because if you're putting good in, you're going to get good out. That doesn't mean it's coming immediately, but it's coming. Because just like the sins of the father, the child should have to pay the blessings from the father. Because I'm pretty sure y'all remember this for my Bible people. I've already blessed your brother, and he shall be blessed. Life and death is of the tongue. Understand, karma is a mirror. If you are a bitch, karma's a bitch. Understand. The training needs to be readdressed. The reform bill needs to be structured properly. And no one should be giving handguns to children. Definitely not someone who's not intelligent enough to understand the difference between a cell phone and a gun.